fúslan le túlar san béal. Ó era mo crí, mo húla mo hir, skelta de hanga ta.
Chapter 5. Destiny is not sought, it is found in the steps we didn't know we were taking. A year and 3 months earlier, Ealasaid watched as the sun slipped slowly toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange. The golden light of dusk bathed the fields while an autumn breeze made the bells on the sheep's necks chime softly. She loved spending time with them. Whenever she could, she took the shepherd's place, even if such a task wasn't fit for a lady. But within the walls of her father's castle, no one dared question the baron's daughter. At least not openly. She cared little for others' judgments. She knew her position brought both privilege and duty, and she behaved as her mother had taught her when the occasion demanded it. But that afternoon, her only obligation was to enjoy what she loved most, nature and animals. She wasn't drawn to luxurious fabrics, or the jewels her father brought from court. She valued what couldn't be bought: a sunset, the birth of a newborn, the whisper of wind through the trees, the song of birds, a blooming field. Sometimes she felt different, as though she didn't belong to her time. Her parents loved her, but they didn't understand her. Even so, they tried, and for her that was enough. She sighed as she saw the flock lying in the grass, heads turned toward the setting sun. She shared their trance. Sunset, like sunrise, was one of her favorite moments. Both reminded her that she was alive, that each day brought new chances. Twilight had a touch of magic. Though it marked the end of the day, the sun withdrew, leaving a trail of beauty, as if promising that even darkness could be beautiful, especially when stars shone and the moon reigned in the sky. As a child, she had once snuck out to sleep under the full moon. Her mother, alarmed, had forbidden her from doing it again. Now she settled for watching from the balcony. Ealasaid. A man's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She stood and brushed the blades of grass from her dress. She didn't care about appearances, but she wanted to look presentable for him. "Oh," and she whispered, a smile forming on her lips. He was a handsome young man, with chestnut hair and hazel eyes, but it wasn't his looks that made her fall in love, it was the way he treated her. They had met when he was 12 and she 10. Owen had arrived at the castle, to be trained as a squire, and later as a knight. The illegitimate son of a feudal lord and a peasant woman, he had grown up in poverty until, after his mother's death, his father, out of conscience or guilt, acknowledged him and sent him to the castle. When he arrived, he was thin, awkward, almost wild. He didn't know how to hold a sword or ride a horse, but he knew how to use his fists, which constantly got him into trouble. Ealasaid noticed him right away. He seemed like a frightened creature in need of care. He was wary at first, but he soon accepted her kindness. Over the years they became confidants. And a year ago, friendship turned into love. Owen was no longer a frail boy. Now he was a strong man, newly knighted. Ealasaid knew he would leave soon, but she hadn't imagined the moment would come so quickly. His expression said it all. "You're leaving," she said, her voice unsteady. Ealasaid. Her name left his lips like a sigh. He touched her cheek and she closed her eyes, bracing for the words she didn't want to hear. "I came to say goodbye. I leave tonight." "Tonight," she echoed, her eyes brimming with tears. "Why so soon?" "Niall Tavish of Windermere needs knights for a siege. He's given me the chance. The pay is good." She wanted to ask where he was going and how dangerous the campaign would be, but she knew he would never tell her. Like her father, Owen protected her from the horrors of war. "Will you return when it ends?" "You know I can't promise that. There will be more battles. But all of this, it's for us." Owen had no lands, no lord to serve, so he would sell his sword. He would become a mercenary, and that pained Ealasaid. "What if you didn't go?" she suggested, taking his hands. "If I tell my father that we're in love, he could grant you a small piece of land as dowry. You'd swear him fealty and we'd live together." Ealasaid, your father will never accept. He will. He loves me. He wants me to be happy. I want to earn my own land. Give you the future you deserve. Prove I'm worth more than a bastard name. That I'm worthy of you. You already are, she said without hesitation. I need to believe it as much as you do. I'm doing this for us. For the children we'll have one day. I want them to be proud of me. He lifted the joined hands. It'll be just a few years. Ealasaid knew it wouldn't be that simple. Saving enough money wouldn't be easy, but she believed in him. Owen would do whatever it took. Do you promise me? I swear. I just need a small property. Once I have it, I'll hang up my spurs. You'll become a peasant, she asked, raising an eyebrow. A farmer, he corrected with a smile. I'll work the land, and you'll care for the animals. We'll sell at the market, and our children will run free through the fields. It had been Ealasaid's dream since she was a child. She had shared it with him so many times, but until now Owen had only listened. He had never said he wanted it too. Those words were the most beautiful gift. We won't raise them for meat, she said, smiling through tears. We'll just care for them. He shook his head, amused, and then stepped closer. He kissed her. It was a brief touch, but enough. Tears streamed down Ealasaid's cheeks, unable to hold back the blend of joy and sorrow. Don't cry, Owen whispered as he fastened something around her neck. A pendant with a red stone gleamed on her chest. It belonged to my mother. My father gave it to her, but to her, he was the love of her life. She made me promise I'd never sell it. Ealasaid already knew that story. He had once wanted to take revenge on his father, but she had taught him to forgive. The Baron had died without leaving him anything, but Owen wouldn't have accepted it anyway. He was a man of principle. And that was something Ealasaid admired deeply. I can't keep it. She tried to remove it, but he placed his hand over hers, pressing the stone to her heart. I want you to have it. So you won't forget me. I'll never forget you, she said. And I'll always wait for you. Chapter 6. Nature doesn't scream, it whispers to those who know how to feel. Ealasaid woke at dawn, as she did every morning. But as soon as she sat up and opened her eyes, she sensed something was off. There was no usual murmur of her maids, and her dress wasn't hanging on the chair in front of the dressing table. In fact, the dressing table itself wasn't where it used to be. Then she remembered, she was no longer in her father's castle. There was no rush to get dressed. Her little brother wouldn't burst into the room demanding her attention. With a nostalgic sigh, she rose. The night before, she had collapsed from exhaustion after the journey and the day's events. She barely remembered going to bed. Though a faint light slipped through the velvet curtains, it wasn't enough. She walked over and pulled them wide open, letting the brightness of the new day flood the room. She paused for a few minutes to take in the view. The fortress was beginning to stir. In the courtyard, maids bustled back and forth with buckets of water and trays of food headed to the kitchens, while the first warriors climbed the stairs toward the great hall. No one had told her what she was expected to do. At home she would have breakfast with her parents and brother, but here she didn't know whether to go down or wait to be summoned. She hadn't eaten the night before, fatigue had defeated hunger. But that morning, with her energy restored, her stomach protested loudly. Her belongings were packed in a chest brought from home. She didn't need most of the dresses or the embroidered belts, but her mother had insisted, and she hadn't wanted to upset her. Her departure had already caused enough sorrow. She chose her favorite green dress. The fabric was worn from use, but it was so comfortable she had mended it more than once. She was about to put it on, then hesitated. That was the dress she would have worn for her daily chores in Yorkshire. But here in the Rutherford clan she had no chores. She was the laird's betrothed. Act like a lady, her mother had warned. And ladies didn't feed chickens or clean stables. With a resigned sigh she put the dress back in the chest and picked out a blue one, still unworn. The seamstress had made it over a year ago from fine silk her father had given her. Her first meeting with Evander hadn't gone as she'd hoped. But the second had to be different. She needed to make a good impression, and with it, make him understand that the best thing for both of them would be not to marry. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Before she could answer, the door creaked open and cautious footsteps approached. "Forgive me, milady. I thought you were still asleep and didn't wish to disturb you," said Marsaili, entering with a tray in her arms. "Don't apologize." "You're welcome," Ealasaid replied with a faint smile. "Let me help you." She carefully took the heavy pitcher that made the tray tremble, and placed it on the table. Marsaili followed with the rest, an apple, honeyed bread and a bit of cheese. "Is the breakfast to your liking?" she asked, noticing a slight grimace on Ealasaid's face. "Yes, thank you," the young woman replied, biting her lip as she used to do as a child when uncertain. "I thought I would be having breakfast in the great hall with my betrothed." She had held on to that idea with a mix of anticipation and nerves. Not because she believed the encounter would change anything, but because it felt like a duty. She was determined not to be intimidated by Evander's presence, or his silences. She met his gruff demeanor with courtesy, just as her mother had taught her. Marsaili frowned, surprised. "Our laird has already eaten, milady." "So early?" "Yes. You may eat whenever you please. And you don't need to dress alone. I've been assigned as your maid. It's my duty to assist you." Ealasaid observed her in silence. She had barely spoken to her the day before, but something about the way Marsaili had tended the wounded dog, her restrained expression, her simple movements, had inspired immediate trust. Perhaps that was what moved her, the sincerity that asked for nothing in return. "I appreciate it, but I don't need help dressing. And there's no need for such formality. If you don't mind, I'd like you to call me by my name." "As you wish," Marsaili replied with a shy smile. "Oh, it was the laird's wish that I serve you." "He asked you?" Ealasaid asked, unable to suppress the flicker of emotion that crossed her chest. Marsaili shook her head. "It was Struan," she corrected quickly, seeing the look forming on Ealasaid's face. "By order of your betrothed." "I see. It was a thoughtful gesture. I can't refuse it if that's the case, but there's no need for you to bring my breakfast or help me dress. I can manage on my own." She'd had maids before. None had lasted long. Some found her too reserved, others too stubborn. She had learned not to expect companionship. Some people were born to be the center of the room, and others to watch from the edges. She belonged to the latter. "In truth, I doubt I'd be much help anyway," Marsaili admitted, her shoulders sinking. "I've never been a lady's maid before." Marsaili's honesty struck her as unexpectedly comforting. She had spent years navigating veiled gestures and measured words. The young woman's candor was like a breath of clean air, unadorned and sincere. "And why did you accept?" Marsaili hesitated, surprised by the question, but answered. "It's an honor that the laird entrusted me with something so important. I don't want to fail him." "And you won't," Ealasaid assured her, glancing around the room for something simple. "You could brush my hair if you like." She offered the brush. Marsaili took it, and Ealasaid sat down. At the first tug on a knot, she flinched. "Thank you, Marsaili." She stood at once, gently took the brush from her and placed it on the table. "Why don't you sit with me while I eat? My maid used to do that." The words felt like a lie, but not completely. She had often dreamed of having that kind of company, someone she could share with freely. Maybe in another time or place there had been such a maid. Marsaili seemed to believe her and agreed. They didn't speak of anything in particular, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time in days, Ealasaid felt truly heard, without judgment. As if in that small morning ritual, something had quietly settled inside her. Later, while Marsaili tidied the room, Ealasaid set out in search of Evander, who she'd been told was at the northern training grounds. She waved to several clan members she passed along the way. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with suspicion. She tried to engage them, just as her mother had advised, asking how they were, but no one replied. She figured perhaps they didn't care much for strangers. She didn't take it personally. Truthfully, she preferred a bit of distance. She wasn't good at talking to people. Animals, on the other hand. As she neared the top of the hill, she spotted a small red-furred creature studying a mushroom with intense focus. She crouched carefully. The squirrel twitched, ready to bolt, but Ealasaid held its gaze in silence. The animal froze, as if hypnotized. Then it looked back at the mushroom. "It's not poisonous," she said with a smile. "You can eat it." The squirrel hesitated, then accepted the offer. Ealasaid remained still, watching. When it finished eating, the squirrel approached her. She held out her hands, and the animal leapt into her palms. "Thank you for trusting me," she whispered, rising to her feet. She was about to set it down, when a boy of about 4 came running toward her. "Can I pet it?" he asked, wide-eyed with wonder. The squirrel tensed. Ealasaid was about to respond, when a young woman, not much older than herself, rushed over. "Tauren. Don't bother the laird's betrothed."
"But Mama, I want to play with the squirrel," the boy pouted.
"She's English, Tauren. She can't understand you," the woman muttered, tugging at his arm. And then Ealasaid understood. That morning she had spoken English to everyone, and that was why they had looked at her warily. But she had known Scottish Gaelic since she was a child. The Yorkshire castle's priest had taught her at her parents' request. "Milady, forgive me," the woman said in halting English. "You needn't apologize. I should be the one to ask forgiveness," Ealasaid replied in perfect Gaelic. "It was rude of me not to speak your language from the start." The woman blushed. Her son, however, hadn't lost track of the moment. "Can I pet the squirrel?" he repeated. Ealasaid smiled. "Better not.
But you can sit in the grass."
The boy obeyed. Ealasaid placed the squirrel on the ground, and asked it to stay still. The animal nibbled at the boy's shoe, making him laugh. His mother sighed. "Forgive me, I shouldn't have allowed it. I didn't think it would damage his shoes," Ealasaid said, noticing a hole. "Don't worry, milady. He usually ruins them kicking stones. Better, squirrel." Ealasaid thanked her with a smile. The woman went after her son, who was already running toward the river. "I should be thanking you," she said before leaving. "These 5 minutes have been the quietest since he learned to walk." Ealasaid laughed, then stood for a moment watching the boy. He was spirited, like her brother. And she already missed him. She resumed her climb toward the summit. The wind blew colder up there. Ealasaid stopped, startled to see Evander approaching. She couldn't explain why, but his presence alone disrupted the rhythm of her thoughts. Perhaps it was the way he walked, so steady, so unshakable. The men of his kind were proud, and he didn't seem to be an exception. She laced her fingers nervously, unsure where to begin. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say 1,000 times, but now everything felt clumsy or inappropriate. It shouldn't be this difficult, she told herself. Evander is a reasonable man, not entirely savage. Maybe, with the right words, she could make him understand her unease. After all, neither of them had chosen this engagement. "It's about the engagement and the wedding date," she said at last. As she spoke, her fingers reached for the stone pendant hidden beneath her dress, the one Owen had given her. She noticed Evander's eyes drop to her hands, and she quickly lowered them, forcing herself to focus on her words. Unable to stay still, she began to walk. He stopped her with a firm gesture, though not a rough one. He took her arm and made her look at him. "If you're worried there won't be time to prepare the wedding, don't be," he said calmly. "We'll marry at court. You need only see that the seamstress makes a dress to your liking." "At William's court?" Ealasaid asked, eyes wide in surprise. Evander studied her, as if trying to decipher something in her gaze. She didn't know what it was, but whatever it might have been, he didn't seem to find it. His brow furrowed. Do you know William? I've never seen him, but they say he's a just and kind king, she replied. She wasn't sure it was true, but repeating what she'd heard seemed safer than risking her real thoughts. Evander let out a dry laugh. Either someone lied to you, milady, or you're trying to be polite. She fell silent, uneasy.
There's no need to pretend in my presence.
Speak honestly. In fact, I demand it. I don't tolerate hypocrisy. She wanted to argue that honesty was exactly what she was trying for, but something in his gaze held her back. It was clear he wasn't one for half-truths. The English don't hold your king in high regard, she said, choosing her words with care. And you? I have no opinion, my lord. I've never had the honor of meeting him. A sly smile touched Evander's lips. You will soon. He wants to speak with you before the wedding, and witness it himself. A chill ran through her. She didn't understand why the king was so invested in this marriage. What importance could such a union possibly hold for him? Is he the one forcing you to marry me? Evander laughed loudly, as if the idea were absurd. No one can force me to do anything I don't wish to do. And do you truly wish to marry me? She asked quietly, the unease in her growing. Why wouldn't I? He replied, frowning. Do you not see yourself as worthy of being my wife? The question threw her off. She hadn't expected that kind of response. She was momentarily speechless.
It's not about worthiness, she said at last, trying to be clear.
The truth is, I don't wish to marry you. The words felt too blunt the moment they left her mouth. I didn't mean to sound so harsh, she added quickly before he could speak. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. But you asked for honesty, and I'm trying. I believe deep down you don't want this marriage either. If you're afraid of going against the king, take me to court. I'm sure he'll understand my reasons. And what are those reasons? He asked softly, his tone sending a chill down her spine. Why is he angry? She thought. I'm giving him a way out. Neither of us would suffer if we ended this. I don't love you, my lord. And you don't love me. Wouldn't you prefer a marriage where that feeling exists? He said nothing. He looked at her intensely, and for a moment, Ealasaid thought she had planted a seed of doubt in him. No, he answered at last, shattering her hope. Love isn't necessary for a marriage, milady. It's a weakness, and I am not a weak man. Weakness, she thought, biting back the urge to argue. Isn't it braver to allow oneself to feel?
Love doesn't weaken.
It strengthens, she murmured, her voice firm with conviction. When you discover that, you'll thank me for not agreeing to marry you. Evander narrowed his eyes. And what do you know of love? She looked away. There was someone in her heart, someone she had once dreamed of a future with, but she couldn't betray that silent pact. Her voice turned to a whisper. Enough to know I could never fall in love with you. He laughed again, making no effort to hide his scorn. Never is a long time, milady. But don't worry. I have no intention of falling in love with you either. Fortunately, this will be a marriage of convenience. Convenience for whom? No one's explained the reasons behind this arrangement. For my clan. And for your father. So it wasn't the king who ordered it? Her father had spoken of an imposition, but perhaps the reasons were different, more political than royal. If you force me to marry, we'll both be miserable. Is that truly what you want? I'm not going to force you. I hope you'll agree to marry me, of your own will. But I've already told you I don't want to. You'll change your mind. I'm sorry, laird. But I won't marry unless I'm in love. Could you sleep knowing the woman beside you doesn't love you? Evander looked at her, as if he didn't understand the dilemma. I appreciate your concern for my sleep, but I assure you I'll rest just fine. I could help you find a woman who loves you, and whom you love. She meant it sincerely, though inside irritation and weariness were beginning to grow. Talking to him was like talking to stone.
The Highlands may be a good place to wait, she thought.
Maybe Owen needs more time, and so do I. I don't want to fall in love, said Evander sharply. And you must forget those fantasies about love. I'm the man you need by your side. You'll be the lady of Clan Rutherford. They'll respect you. I'll protect you and our children with my life. You'll want for nothing. I will lack something, Ealasaid whispered. I'll lack the most important thing, love. Evander scoffed. So it's only because you're not in love with me that you refuse to marry? Ealasaid nodded silently. And because I'm already in love, she thought, though she didn't dare say it aloud.
Then fall in love with me, he said matter-of-factly.
Ealasaid stared at him, incredulous. For a moment she thought he was mocking her, but the seriousness in his face said otherwise. My lord, with all due respect, I don't. But he was no longer listening.
Now that I've solved your problem, I have matters to attend to.
And with that he walked away. Chapter 7. All that is meant to be waits patiently in the shadows. Sometimes we think we know what we want, until the soul reveals it longs for something else. Ealasaid had arrived with a clear purpose, to break the engagement. To convince the Laird of Rutherford that the best path for both of them was to honor the arrangement with courtesy, but not carry it out. Not out of disdain or pride, but because she refused to bind herself to a fate she had not chosen. But desire, true desire, is not always obvious at first. It doesn't present itself with clarity or form. Sometimes it hides behind resistance, behind the urgency to flee, behind the need to prove one is free. And yet it remains. Silent, subtle, pulsing beneath every contradiction. Because what happens when the thing we had decided to want no longer sustains us? When the soul opens to a possibility the ego refuses to admit. Love, that kind of love that frightens because it reaches places no one has touched before, does not always arrive with sweetness. Sometimes it comes as an obstacle, an annoyance, a threat to the plan. But it is no less true for that. And then the choice becomes more complex. Because there are decisions that cannot be made with logic, or habit, or duty. They are made from a loyalty to what lies deepest within, to what we don't yet understand but somehow know is sacred. Ealasaid wasn't ready to marry.
But something inside her was beginning to break down the walls she had built for protection.
And desire, that desire she thought absent, was starting to whisper her name. Ealasaid felt her heart pounding violently against her chest. Her breath quickened, a strange heat swept through her body. It took her a moment to recognize the sensation. She was furious. And she wasn't usually one to anger. Not because she couldn't, but because her tempered nature, shaped by duty and restraint, rarely allowed such impulses. But that man, that stubborn laird who claimed to be her future husband, had awakened a fury she didn't know she possessed. She clasped her hands tightly, the only barrier between her and the desire to go after him. Because if she found him right now, she couldn't promise she'd hold back. She might well smash a stone against his head just to knock some sense into him. Evander Rutherford was inconsiderate, inflexible. How could he speak of love with such carelessness, as if it were a whim one could choose or discard at will? How could he dismiss her feelings as if they were trifles, weightless and false? She inhaled deeply, again and again, trying to calm herself. She scolded herself for letting anger cloud her judgment. No matter how unfair he had been, she couldn't afford to lose control. And since talking to Evander was useless, she had only one option left: buy time. Delay the wedding until Owen came for her. Because he would come. She knew it. Once he learned of the engagement, he'd find a way to convince the king to annul it. Owen had no lands or titles, but the love he bore her would be enough to defy Richard, even Eleanor, the Queen Regent, while her son fought in the Crusades. Because love, true love, was stronger than any decree. And the bond between her and Owen was pure, honest, indestructible. Many men would never understand that. Evander least of all. But Owen did. And if everything went wrong, they would run. Live with little, but live together. They needed nothing more. Meanwhile, trapped in the Rutherford castle, she had to keep her mind occupied or she would lose it. Ealasaid was not one to resign herself to silent embroidery, aimless walks or watching over maids. She admired her mother, yes, but she knew she would wither if she had to live that same life. She had been born noble, destined to be a lady of a castle, but that didn't mean she wanted to be. Determined to shake off the bitter taste of her encounter with Evander, she headed to her chamber to change. She chose an old brown linen dress, and set out in search of the man in charge of the animals.
But she didn't get far.
Marsaili intercepted her in the great hall, frowning. Ealasaid, I finally found you. Did you change your dress? She asked, giving her a quick once-over. Ealasaid smiled. She was used to that kind of reaction.
I don't want to ruin the fine dresses.
I'd rather save them for when I have no other choice. They were expensive garments brought by her father from court, which she wore reluctantly, to her mother's dismay. Marsaili nodded, though with a trace of doubt. I could make you a new one if you'd like, she offered gently.
It would be a pleasure.
Ealasaid hesitated for a moment, before replying. I appreciate it, but it won't be necessary. I have more than I need. The maid sighed. For a moment, she seemed to wrestle with herself. I don't mean to be impertinent, she murmured, biting her lip, but the laird's betrothed shouldn't be walking around the clan in a dress full of patches. It's my duty to make sure you look impeccable. Ealasaid nodded, understanding the young woman's intention. Marsaili only wanted to do her job well, to not disappoint her master. She'd met many maids before, most of them quickly gave up on her unconventional ways. But with Marsaili, there was something different. Perhaps a potential ally. All right, she relented at last.
If you want to make a dress, go ahead.
And I'll wear mine when I walk around the clan. She smiled as she saw the relief in Marsaili's eyes, relief that vanished the moment she added, but while I'm working with the animals. Working with the animals, she interrupted, incredulous.
Yes, I'd like to work in the stables, Ealasaid said, puzzled by her reaction.
I know it's a position of trust, but I need to earn it. The warriors won't let just anyone tend to their horses.
That's why I'll start with the chickens or the pigs.
The pigs? Marsaili echoed, turning pale. You don't need to come with me. Stay in the sewing room and tell the laird I asked for a dress urgently, Ealasaid suggested. She knew pigs repulsed many people. To her, all animals deserved love. Marsaili watched her in silence, still biting her lip. Ealasaid, it's not my place to tell you what to do, but I'm not sure it's appropriate for the laird's betrothed. Ealasaid sighed. I'm more than capable. At my father's castle. She didn't finish the sentence. A growl interrupted her. She turned instinctively toward the fireplace. There in front of the cold hearth, a large dog stared at her. Its coat was dark and long with bangs that partially covered its eyes. Ealasaid felt the urge to brush the fur away so she could see him properly, but she restrained herself. She wouldn't touch him without permission. Not out of fear of his teeth, animals didn't frighten her, but out of respect.
That's the laird's dog, Marsaili explained, stepping back. He always sleeps there.
The white cat used to keep him company, but ever since the kittens were born she won't leave the mother's side. The animal growled louder. Ealasaid crouched down in front of him, bringing herself to his level, and offered a calm smile. Be careful, Marsaili warned, swallowing hard. He's very aggressive. Ealasaid raised an eyebrow, not taking her eyes off the dog. The sound hadn't struck her as threatening, but more like a warning. As if the animal was simply asking to be left in peace. Did we wake you? She asked softly, as though speaking to an equal. If so, I apologize. It wasn't our intention to disturb your rest. Marsaili fell silent. She couldn't understand how anyone could speak with such courtesy to a dog.
But something about the scene left her speechless.
Even more so when the dog stopped growling and tilted his head slightly, without retreating.
I promise it won't happen again.
Would you be kind enough to tell me your name? His name is Branwen, said a male voice. Ealasaid looked up. Evander was there, watching her with a spark of amusement in his eyes. She turned her gaze back to the dog. Not because she hadn't heard her betrothed, but because it was easier to look at the animal than meet that man's eyes. It was always like that with him. His mere presence seemed to change the air, make it denser. His scent, moss and wet earth, slipped through her senses. Wild. Untamed. The only being besides the dog she still didn't know how to approach. Branwen is your name? She asked the animal, a smile slipping through. Evander scoffed, incredulous. Are you deaf, girl? Do you expect him to answer you? Ealasaid slowly raised her head, forcing herself to face him. His mocking smile turned her stomach. She wasn't sure if it was from anger, or something more unsettling. Branwen is the name you gave him, she said calmly. But, are you certain it's the one he feels is his? Evander frowned, and for a moment seemed disoriented. Ealasaid felt a strange and unexpected delight at the sight. Dogs are loyal, she continued without thinking much. They respond to the name they're given, even if they didn't choose it. Evander shook his head, as if trying to shake off the nonsense of her words. Ealasaid looked at the dog again. Do you like that name? She whispered. The animal tilted his head. She smiled. Until you decide, may I call you Branwen? The dog didn't move away. He even seemed to relax. Strike me down, Evander muttered. Ealasaid didn't answer. She reached out a hand toward the dog, who sniffed her fingers calmly and gave them a gentle lick. She let out a soft laugh. I'd like to be your friend too, she said sweetly, standing as Branwen returned to his corner. It was a pleasure to meet you. Rest well. Was it to the pigsty that I heard you say you wanted to go? Evander asked, still perplexed. I was hoping you'd already left, she murmured without looking at him. Girl, I don't know what manners they taught you in England, but here in the Highlands we respect the laird. She turned then slowly. Not with defiance, but with the dignity of someone who knows she's at a disadvantage and refuses to yield. I'll respect the laird when he gives me reason to. As she heard her own words, she was surprised, not for thinking them, but for having said them aloud. Marsili let out a shaky breath, as if she'd been holding it in. Marsili, Evander ordered, without taking his eyes off Ealasaid. Wait for your lady outside. The maid hesitated. She looked at Ealasaid, who gave a brief nod. She didn't want her to suffer the laird's temper. It wasn't worth it. Forgive me, said Ealasaid once Marsili had left. She said it because it was expected of her, not because she meant it. She had been raised to show respect. Not to raise her voice, not to speak out of turn. Her mother had made sure she learned how to behave like a lady, and she had complied. At least until now. I'm sorry if I offended you, she added politely. You're not sorry, Evander replied, stepping toward her, calm and composed. He didn't seem angry. More intrigued. As if he were measuring her. Testing her. Ealasaid held her ground. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of backing down. Much was said about Evander Rutherford, but he didn't frighten her. You're right, she admitted in a low voice, not lowering her gaze. It wasn't fear that made her want to look away, but something else, something deeper and more confusing. Still, she kept her eyes on his. But my parents taught me to show respect. And they failed spectacularly, he said, stopping in front of her. The comment pricked at her pride like a thorn. Ealasaid pressed her lips together, holding back the urge to snap back. But indignation swelled inside her. Don't speak of them like that, she murmured, voice low and tense. I won't allow it. Evander smiled. Not mockingly, but with a kind of satisfaction she didn't like. I prefer you when you let the fire show, he said in a lower tone, leaning toward her. When you don't try to hide it. His finger brushed her chin almost gently. Ealasaid stepped back at once, taking 2 paces away from him. She tried to seem unaffected, but her voice trembled and she knew it. He noticed too. He smiled with that arrogance that exasperated her, and slowly lowered his hand. There was something unsettling in his closeness. Something that disturbed everything she thought she knew about herself. She felt off balance, as if her inner world had blurred. "I don't like you at all," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "You like me more than you'd like to admit," he said with a glint of amusement in his eyes, moving forward like he was cornering her, unhurried and sure of each step. Ealasaid was retreating without realizing it, until her back met the wall. That's when she knew she'd given too much ground. Evander placed both palms against the wall beside her head, a gesture that caged her in without touching her. "You won't intimidate me," she whispered, forcing her voice to sound firm. He gave a slow smile.
"That's not my intention, milady."
"Then what is?" she asked, feeling his breath so close it seemed the world had shrunk to the space between them. Evander's eyes, as clear as the ice on the locks, looked at her like they wanted to pierce through to her soul. "I can read people," he said. "But you're a mystery. And I'm intrigued to find out what lies behind those eyes." Ealasaid swallowed hard. She didn't like being observed so intensely. There were parts of herself she didn't fully understand. And yet she didn't dislike his words. Not as much as she should. Something inside her, subtle and unsettling, felt seen. "I'm no different from other women, Laird. Trust me, you are. Far too much." She didn't know if he meant it as a compliment or a warning. But unintentionally, a smile crossed her lips. "Few people manage to surprise me, and you have." She didn't know if that was good or bad, only that it was true. She bit her lower lip without realizing, harder than intended. A soft gasp escaped her as the pain surprised her. Evander pulled back slightly, and with unexpected gentleness touched the spot with a finger. Ealasaid shivered. He touched it, as if he could soothe it. As if, for a moment, he had forgotten the hardness that usually marked his every move. But no. That man wasn't tender. There was something restrained in his every motion, a latent violence. And yet, when he looked at her like that— "Laird," she whispered, unsure if it was a warning or a plea, her breath barely grazing the finger still touching her. Evander drew back as if he'd touched flames. His eyes widened, as if waking from a spell. "By Christ's nails," he snapped, furious. "You won't trap me with your charms, milady." Ealasaid stared at him, confused. Why was he angry with her? "My charms," she repeated, not fully understanding. But he had already turned away, and was leaving without another word. She watched him go, unmoving. That man threw her completely off balance. She never knew what to expect from him. And while that often happened to her with people, hence her preference for the company of animals, less confusing, more honest, with Evander it was different. There was something about him that stirred a curiosity she couldn't contain. A silent need to understand him. And that unsettled her more than she dared admit. She sighed. Maybe it was the Highland air, so raw and wild, that was starting to unhinge her. Whatever it was, the wisest thing would be to avoid the laird as much as possible. At least until Owen came to fetch her. Though she would soon discover that it wouldn't be so easy. Chapter 8.
The heart knows before reason accepts it.
Ealasaid felt a tremor run through her body. It wasn't from cold or fear, but something deeper, a restlessness that slipped beneath her skin like a silent current. She couldn't quite grasp why, but his presence unsettled her. The laird hadn't said a word yet, but his gaze cut through her like a hidden blade in the shadows. There was a tightly held tension in his eyes, something almost feral. Was he angry to find her there, alone in the dim corridor? The intensity radiating from him seemed close to breaking. "You're right," he said at last, his voice low, rougher than usual. "You shouldn't wander the stronghold alone.
It's not wise."
It wasn't a scolding, but it wasn't a mere warning either. There was something else in his tone, something she couldn't quite name. Ealasaid looked away, unable to decipher it. "I thought that at least here, I could walk without feeling watched," she murmured, barely louder than a breath. Evander narrowed his eyes and stepped toward her. His presence filled the space. Ealasaid swallowed hard. This castle is not your home, he said, unmoving.
Not yet.
His words hit deeper than expected. She didn't know why they hurt, but they did. Did he see her as an outsider? As someone who didn't belong? She didn't respond, though a bitter echo stirred in her chest. He went on, his voice calmer, as if reining himself in. But it will be. And when it is, its walls will be here to protect you. Not to lose yourself in them. Ealasaid frowned. Speaking with him felt like trying to untie a wet knot. Every sentence seemed to hide another, deeper one. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but he was quicker. I spoke with Struan, he said, shifting topics without warning. He says you're interested in working with animals. She nodded, meeting his gaze steadily. I grew up around horses, she said, and though her voice remained soft, there was a tension beneath it. I'm no stranger to hard work, and I don't want to spend my days embroidering by the fire. Evander studied her in silence, for what felt like an eternity. Then he nodded, slowly.
I don't expect you to.
But I also won't let you put yourself at risk without need. And you think I'm doing this on a whim? She asked, holding back the irritation rising like a wave in her chest.
You don't know me.
I know you have spirit, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. And that it can get you into trouble, if you don't know when to keep it to yourself. She stepped closer. Not to challenge him, but because something in her was drawn tight, reaching for a truth she couldn't find. And I know you hold back more than you say. That you leave things unsaid. Sometimes I wonder if you're waiting for me to guess what's on your mind. Evander didn't answer right away. He looked down at her, and for a moment his expression softened, as if something inside him gave way. No. I just want you to be careful. With others. And with me. The last word hung between them. She didn't know exactly what it meant, but something in her chest tightened. Was it a warning? A shelter? A crack? Before she could speak, he turned away. Let's go back. I don't want Marsaili finding us here, and letting her imagination run wild. Ealasaid followed him in silence, her heart clenched. Because something had shifted. She felt it in the way the air thickened between them, in how her body reacted before her mind could. Something had been lit. Something dangerous, untamed, and perhaps inevitable. Chapter 9. Power lies with those who remember, not with those who dominate. Marsaili didn't share her lady's optimism. Few men would dare defy Laird Rutherford, and she knew it well. She wasn't like Ealasaid. She didn't dream of impossible futures or get swept away by illusions. Marsaili kept her feet firmly on the ground, and understood better than anyone the unspoken rules of their world. Evander would never allow Ealasaid to escape the path set for her, just as he would never allow her to marry Orlais.
But she didn't have the heart to say it.
How could she break the heart of someone so young, so full of hope? She chose to keep her thoughts to herself. And what will you do in the meantime? She asked cautiously. Wait, Ealasaid replied, gently stroking Aloan's head. And teach you to ride, she added with a mischievous smile. A small laugh escaped Marsaili, though getting on a horse was the last thing she wanted. Still, she welcomed the change of subject. I'm going to fall and crack my head open, she muttered, eyeing Aloan with suspicion. You won't, Ealasaid said with certainty. If I tear my dress, Morag will have a fit. Morag? Ealasaid frowned, intrigued. She oversees the maids. And makes sure everything in the stronghold runs as it should. I suppose that'll be your job when you marry the laird. Marsaili stopped abruptly, realizing what she'd just said. But Ealasaid didn't seem upset. Go to my chambers, she said calmly. In the chest at the foot of the bed are my dresses. There's a grey one patched up. You can wear it. Though Marsaili knew every corner of that room, every piece of her lady's wardrobe, she nodded with slight hesitation. Ealasaid, I don't think it's. It doesn't matter if it gets dirty or torn, Ealasaid interrupted firmly. Marsaili hesitated. She knew she wouldn't be able to change her mind, so finally she nodded.
I'll be right back.
She was about to turn when Ealasaid stopped her, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. You're going to marry Orlais. You'll make it happen because love always wins its battles.
But you might have to go far away, and you'll need to know how to ride.
Marsaili said nothing. Not because she believed the words, but because Ealasaid had spoken them with such conviction that denying them would have hurt. And because deep down she wanted her to be right. She hadn't grown up with care and tenderness, but in a world that punished disobedience. She knew a maid didn't marry a laird's brother. Just as she knew a lady didn't choose whom to love. Ealasaid was destined for a loveless marriage. And she, to watch Orlais be given to someone else for the good of the clan.
But she didn't say it.
Instead she nodded again, and went in search of the grey dress. She did it so as not to shatter her lady's illusions. And because deep within her, she longed for love to truly conquer all. Because only beside Orlais could she ever be truly happy. Chapter 10. Duty born of love is never a burden. Ealasaid readied Eloan for the ride. The mare, a bit temperamental, made her displeasure known with a haughty snort, drawing a smile from her mistress. She knew Eloan was scolding her for leaving her alone in the stables. Eloan was spoiled, and Ealasaid, though fully aware, couldn't help but feel a bit guilty. She stroked the mare's muzzle gently. "Would you forgive me if I brought you a honeyed carrot?" she whispered conspiratorially. Most mares didn't care for honey, but Eloan had a sweet tooth just like her. Since she was a foal, Ealasaid had treated her to the sweets the cook made for her young lady. Eloan nudged her arm in response, though briefly, as if still wanting to make her displeasure known. Ealasaid had heard the rumors countless times. People called her eccentric for talking to animals. Even her parents had frowned at her behavior. But she knew the truth, animals did communicate just in their own way. They didn't speak or reason like humans, but if you paid attention you could hear them. Ealasaid had always known how. "All right. Wait here. I'm going to get one." She was interrupted by a series of impatient whinnies, and sighed. "Fine, I'll bring several. For everyone." She didn't know exactly how many horses were in the stronghold. She'd chosen to keep her distance, giving them time to adjust to her presence, focusing solely on Eloan. "Don't be manipulative," she chided gently as she tied her up again. The mare looked at her with large mournful eyes. "I can't let you loose. The other horses aren't used to you yet. They might hurt you by accident." Eloan lowered her head, her brown gaze fixed on the ground. Ealasaid nearly gave in but held her ground. If she truly wanted her mare to adjust to the new surroundings, she couldn't indulge her every whim. It was for her own good. She kissed her ear and scratched behind the other one, Eloan's favorite spot. The mare closed her eyes and sighed, melting into the pleasure of her caresses. Ealasaid took the opportunity to step away, already thinking of how to carry the carrots, when she tripped over an empty bucket in the middle of the stable, and landed on the ground with a thud. The bucket flew and crashed into one of the walls. Luckily it didn't hit any of the animals, though they all neighed in alarm.
"Shush," a voice called from the entrance.
"No need for all the ruckus." Ealasaid looked up and found Orlais standing there. The horses fell silent at once, even Eloan, which was rare for her. The young man had a scowl, and his lips twisted in displeasure. His clear eyes landed on Ealasaid, but she didn't find the warmth she'd glimpsed earlier when Marsaili introduced them. He looked like he was angry at the world, as if her mere presence irritated him. She tried not to take it personally. Maybe he was just having a bad day. "We meet again," she said with a polite smile, keeping her tone friendly. Orlais raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard. But after looking her over, a crooked smile tugged at his lips. "Did you hurt yourself?" Ealasaid noticed something had changed in him. He no longer seemed like the shy boy from before. There was something more confident in his manner, bolder. Maybe he was different when Marsaili wasn't around. I'm fine, thank you, she said, waving it off. I'm glad you came. I'm going to need your help. Ole's smile widened. I want to know how many horses are in the stronghold. I want to give each of them a carrot, she added, trying to push herself up from the hay-covered floor.
But she couldn't manage.
The bucket had held some water, and the ground was damp. Her hands slipped, keeping her down. Ole laughed and stepped closer. I'll go get the carrots myself.
That's very kind, but you don't have to. Let me help you, he interrupted, offering his hand.
Ole's informal tone contrasted with his earlier politeness, but Ealasaid took it as a sign of trust. Thank you. She took his hand, and he helped her up.
But to her surprise, he didn't let go.
Instead, he laced his fingers with hers and lifted their hands as he stepped closer. Ealasaid frowned.
What are you doing?
Exactly what you're asking for, girl, he said with a teasing smile, sliding his other arm around her waist.
That damsel in distress act has stirred my desire.
Ealasaid stared at him, speechless. Was he flirting with her? Had she misunderstood? Are you trying to betray Marsaili? She asked, frozen in shock. Ole let out a humorless laugh. Marsaili, he repeated with disdain. I have no beloved. Who told you that lie? He didn't love Marsaili. Ealasaid had seen the way they looked at each other, the mutual adoration. That couldn't have been fake. Had she been wrong?
Was it Skara? He added when she didn't respond.
Don't believe her. She's jealous of you. You're new, and very beautiful. Don't hold it against her. Skara? How many women was he lying to? Indignation surged in her chest like a fire.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Let me go, she shouted, tearing herself from his grasp and shoving him hard in the chest. Ole stumbled back a few steps, confused. He watched her in silence before smiling again. I see, he murmured.
You like to play games.
As long as we both know they end with your back on the hay, and me on top of you. Ealasaid froze. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're despicable. A vile man, she shouted, her voice trembling with fury.
How dare you speak to me like that?
Ole stared at her without flinching, then clicked his tongue. Are you one of those who needs sweet words to be with a man? He sneered. I'm no good at that, maybe you could teach me. He stepped toward her, slow but sure. Ealasaid didn't move, still too stunned. When he saw she didn't back away, he took it as an invitation. He leaned in to kiss her, and that's when she reacted. She brought her knee up with force and struck him between the legs. Chapter 11. True duty is not imposed, it is chosen. Ealasaid had never raised her hand against anyone. Not even in childhood, when sibling fights were allowed under certain rules. And yet, she found herself doing it. The fury that had driven her wasn't only because of the young man's audacity, but something deeper, a sharp sense of injustice, as if Marsaili were the true victim. Her maid was sweet, loyal, and didn't deserve to be caught in such a game. The heat in her cheeks burned more for her than for herself. Ole doubled over with a groan, hands shielding himself, his face pale with pain, lips tightly pressed together. At first, Ealasaid felt a flicker of satisfaction. He had brought it on himself. But when she saw him still writhing, unable to straighten up, a shadow of doubt made her take a step forward. Are you all right? She asked, afraid she might have seriously hurt him. He's fine, came a familiar voice from the stable entrance. But his pride is in pieces. Evander stood in the doorway, his expression torn between anger and amusement. Hearing him, Ole managed to straighten up, his face still contorted with pain. He turned to his brother. She. Careful, brother, Evander cut in, his voice low and sharp. I could expel you from the clan for trying to assault my betrothed. Betrothed, the young man repeated, scanning Ealasaid from head to toe.
She looks like a servant.
And she tried to seduce me. Ealasaid couldn't believe her ears.
That's a lie, she snapped, folding her arms defiantly, a gesture that almost made Evander smile. You're the one who disrespected me.
When he had entered the stable and found them so close, Evander had nearly lost control. But seeing her defend herself with such courage and skill stirred something entirely different. He wanted to applaud her. And if he let himself, he'd lift her in his arms and carry her to his chamber, though he would never say that aloud. You used your charms on me, the young man protested angrily. You want to turn me against my brother? Is that it? Ruagri, enough. Evander's voice cracked through the air like a whip. Ruagri. Ealasaid frowned. Why did you tell me your name was Orlais? I never told you my name, the young man shot back. Despite his size and poise, there was something in his tone, offended and arrogant, that reminded her of spoiled children who complained when they didn't get their way. The comparison struck her like a flash, surprising but revealing. You did, when Marsaili introduced us. Evander let out a laugh as he realized what had happened. He should have been angry with his brother, but he found it impossible. The whole scene had an irresistible comic edge, and his betrothed unknowingly had proven herself more than capable of defending her own. Marsaili didn't introduce you. I just met you. Ruagri, go find Orlais. Wait for me in the training yard. I'll take care of the horses. The laird's tone turned firm, commanding. Ruagri didn't move. Do it before I change my mind and punish you for the way you spoke to my betrothed. The young man cast Ealasaid a venomous glance before leaving with reluctant steps.
Why did they lie to me?
Ealasaid whispered, still confused. I thought I could trust Marsaili. Though she spoke to herself, Evander heard her clearly. The sadness in her voice stirred an unexpected unease in him. He had planned to let the game go on a bit longer, but something in her expression, in those clear blue eyes brimming with restrained emotion, stopped him. No one lied to you, lass, he said, drawing her attention. Ruagri and Orlais are twins. Twins? Ealasaid raised a brow, confused. Then she looked at him with suspicion. And did you plan all this? Me, he repeated, surprised. He was not easily thrown off balance, but this woman had a talent for it. And she'd managed it more than once in a single day. Don't play innocent. She pointed at him, accusingly. Everything suddenly made sense. What if he had planned this from the start? The thought hit her like a gust, igniting her voice with fear and distrust. This wasn't a coincidence, was it? She whispered, looking at him with growing unease. Did you want to force me into accepting your proposal? Evander's expression hardened. Every trace of amusement vanished from his face. Did you set a trap for me? She said accusingly, though her voice trembled slightly. To what end? To make me accept what was already decided. Do you think I need tricks to make a woman accept me as her husband? The darkness in his gaze stole her breath. If that's what you believe, milady, then you don't know me at all. Ealasaid didn't hesitate. No, I don't. A faint smile curved Evander's lips. You're not wrong. And it's worth remembering that your kings have granted me the right to marry you.
Then why don't you use it? She asked, defiant.
Evander tilted his head, and smiled with that look she was beginning to recognize. Dangerous. Do you want me to? He asked, stepping closer. You promised I wouldn't have to marry you if I didn't want to.
I never said that, lass.
I said you would marry me willingly. Evander closed the distance between them even more. Isn't that the same? Ealasaid whispered, feeling her pulse quicken. It wasn't nerves. It was something else. No, it's not. I don't make promises I can't keep. With a swift movement, he slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her to him. He'd done it just like his brother, but this time Ealasaid didn't feel revulsion. Quite the opposite. How can anyone be made to want something willingly? She asked, more to herself than to him, confused by the paradox she'd just heard. She had only been with the clan for 3 days, and already found herself in similar situations with Evander.
But far from feeling intimidated, her body seemed to adapt, even crave it.
There was something about him. Something she couldn't name, but that knocked the breath from her lungs and made her heart beat faster. Was it just provocation? Or was there a silent challenge in his gaze, a game she had somehow already begun to play? As if reading her thoughts, Evander lowered his head to find her eyes. Perhaps it was just a tactic to distract her. If so, it worked. Every rational thought vanished when their eyes met. His sun-kissed face bore a barely visible scar on his cheek. But it wasn't his skin that held her attention, it was that strange and intoxicating mix of sensual lips and darkened blue eyes like the night. Most people feared the dark. She had always found it fascinating. As a child, she liked to escape into the forest after sunset. Once she rescued a baby owl that had fallen from its nest, and from that moment she felt a strange bond with those silent, loyal creatures who lived among shadows without losing their dignity. Maybe that's why when she looked into the laird's dark blue eyes, she felt no fear. She sensed that sometimes, only those who can move through shadows are truly worthy of trust. That night she learned that sometimes to find beauty, you had to look into the darkness. And now as she gazed into the laird's deep eyes, she wondered if behind his shadow lay a soul worthy of love. Evander tilted his head slowly, as if afraid to break the spell. His lips were about to brush hers, and Ealasaid felt an unfamiliar vertigo stir in her chest. That kiss would change everything. It wasn't like the only kiss she had shared with Owen, brief and clumsy, driven more by curiosity than desire. This one, instead, seemed to ignite something inside her she hadn't known was there. And she couldn't allow that. Not yet. A neigh pulled her from the fog she had been slipping into. Eloan, her mare, watched her with ears perked behind Evander. It took her a moment to understand the gesture. She was asking for permission. As if the choice was still hers. But Evander, unaware of the silent exchange between woman and animal, reached for her cheek, brushing it with the tip of his fingers, then gently circled the back of her neck. His lips touched hers in a light kiss, barely a caress, as if afraid to startle her. But even that subtle contact was enough to set her skin ablaze. His warm breath wrapped around her, and for an instant there was no war, no pacts, no promises. Only that trembling, slow touch that lasted just long enough to leave her soul suspended. If she didn't act, she wouldn't be able to stop him. Or maybe she wouldn't want to. She raised a hand toward Eloan. The mare stretched her neck and bit firmly into the laird's shirt, tugging at him with stubborn force. Evander cursed as he broke away, just enough for Ealasaid to slip free and take off running. "I'm a skilled hunter, Ealasaid," he shouted after her, laughter in his voice. "You can't run from me. I'll always find you." Chapter 12. Sometimes, fulfilling duty is a betrayal, other times it is salvation. Evander fixed his gaze on Ruigri again. They were alone in the clearing, under the dense shade of the oaks. In the distance, Orle and Struan's laughter still echoed faintly through the forest. "So you want to play," he murmured with a half-smile. Ruigri raised an eyebrow. "Is that an invitation?" Evander didn't answer. He drew his sword, and the hiss of metal was reply enough. Ruigri didn't take long to follow suit. For a few tense seconds they measured each other in silence, the kind that comes before a storm. The first strike was sudden. Evander lunged with the speed of a wolf, but Ruigri dodged cleanly, spinning away and countering with a low sweep that the laird blocked just in time. The steel blades clashed hard, sending sparks and guttural sounds into the air. Ruigri fought with agility, almost lightness. Evander, by contrast, clung to precision, measuring each step, each turn. There was no hatred between them, not even rivalry, just an old tension neither had ever named. And now it spoke through the dance of steel. The sun flickered through the leaves, tracing lines of light across their swords. Evander spun and pushed forward with his body, forcing Ruigri to step back. "You've improved," he said, breathless, not pausing. "You think? I haven't even started trying." The duel raged on, fierce and focused, until a long whistle from the woods shattered the spell. They froze instantly, alert. "That's Orle," said Evander, lowering his sword. "Something's wrong." They ran toward the sound. Struan had gone ahead, and was waving his arms to get their attention.
Laird.
Come. It's urgent, he shouted, and the tone alone made Evander quicken his pace. They found Orlais crouched beside a rider covered in dust and sweat. He was one of the sentries, barely able to stay upright.
What happened?
Evander asked, gripping the man's shoulders. Ambush south of Drummadrocket Pass, he panted. 2 of ours are dead. Logan's wounded. We barely got away. Orlais clenched his fists, but it was Struan who spoke. Who was it? McTavish, the rider spat blood.
But not just them.
There was another banner, one we didn't recognize at first, not until it was too late. Evander's face lost all color. MacAlpin. The sentry nodded. For a moment the forest went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Evander stood tall, his face like stone. Get him back to the castle. See he's tended to immediately, he ordered. As Orlais helped escort the wounded man away, Ruagri stepped closer.
You think they've joined forces? I don't know. But this changes everything.
Struan spat on the ground.
That wasn't a skirmish.
It was a statement. Then there will be an answer, Evander said, and not a trace of the earlier game remained in his voice. Struan didn't refute a single word his friend said. He couldn't. He knew Donal was capable of exactly what Evander was suggesting, and far worse. The man had manipulated his own brother into turning against him, and had tried to send Isbale to a convent, just to stop her wedding. His daughter's suffering meant as little to him, as the honor he had long since abandoned. I promised Isbale I wouldn't kill her father, but that's the one promise I intend to break, Struan hissed, barely containing the fury burning inside him.
And it won't be quick.
He'll beg for death. I won't give it to him. He'll pay, day after day.
We'll tell her I did it, Evander interjected.
Struan looked up at his laird.
She doesn't have to know it was you.
Struan nodded. The last thing he wanted was to bring more pain to Isbale. Maybe I should tell her what we've discovered. If she hears it from me. She'll still beg you not to kill him, Evander cut in, his voice calm but unyielding. Your wife is too kind for her own good. Struan lowered his head in resignation. Maybe it's time we tell King William the secret our father took to the grave, he suggested then, drawing an immediate frown from Evander. He can't act yet, but with that information. The twins aren't ready, Evander interrupted, lowering his voice and glancing around even though they were alone. And I won't use them as currency. This war will be fought with honor, not schemes. Struan nodded. He had spoken from his heart, but he knew Evander was right. He didn't want to drag the twins into it either, even if Isbel's safety always came first. I shouldn't have suggested it, he admitted with a sigh. When it comes to her, I lose my head. But I'd never put you or your brothers in danger. Evander nodded, because he knew it was true. Sometimes I fear I won't be able to kill him when the moment comes, Struan confessed.
Not for him.
For her. I'm afraid she'll find out and hate me. Or worse, that she'll suffer. I love her. Evander tilted his head.
Love, he echoed with skepticism.
You all talk about love like it's the most important thing. You, Ealasaid. What does love have to do with vengeance? Why give up justice for a feeling? Because there's nothing I wouldn't do for Isbale. When you fall in love, you'll understand. Evander let out a dry laugh. I'll never fall in love. Love is for weak men. In his eyes, women wielded beauty like a weapon. They seduced, manipulated and got their way while men let themselves be dragged along. He wouldn't fall into that trap. Never. At least that's what he had believed, until he met Ealasaid. But no matter how much she looked like an angel, Evander knew all too well how deceiving appearances could be. Do you think I'm a weak man? Struan asked, raising an eyebrow, more curious than offended. No, Evander replied without hesitation. Do you think I'd name a weak man as commander? But I do think Isbale has you wrapped around her finger. You do anything she asked? As long as it doesn't risk her life and makes her happy, yes, Struan replied with a satisfied smile. I'll never allow a woman to have that kind of power over me, Evander said, firm as stone. Struan shrugged indifferently. So what are you going to do about Donal MacAlpin and Bran McTavish? He asked, returning to the matter at hand. Evander sighed, frustrated. Hell if I know. Marrying Ealasaid wouldn't just give you Roxburghshire. It would make you King William's son-in-law. That would allow him to support you publicly, without drawing suspicion or criticism from the other lairds. Evander thought it would be easier to go unarmed against the MacAlpins and MacTavishers, and defeat them alone, than to convince Ealasaid to marry him without a fight. If he weren't so busy, he'd ride to Yorkshire Castle and kill the Baron himself for not raising his daughter properly. What noble lady dreamed of marrying for love? Struan watched him for a few moments, amused.
Should I assume you haven't managed to convince her?
Ealasaid will do as I command, Evander said, more to himself than to Struan.
She'll obey.
She'll marry me. And you ordered her to tend the pigs. Evander snorted. He knew. She'd gathered eggs, chased chickens and scolded a stray goat. That woman was a mystery.
There's nothing wrong with that, he replied defensively.
Until she's my wife, the servants won't respect her. In the meantime, she needs something to do. Struan barely managed to contain his laughter. Evander had no control over her, and they both knew it. So she asked for permission, and you gave it. Do you want me to challenge you to a duel? Struan turned serious, not out of fear but because there was no time to waste with swords. If William won't intervene, we need another path. The only thing I want from him is that land. I won't go begging for help like a child. When he saw Struan about to argue, Evander raised a hand. Don't insist. I won't change my mind. Struan nodded. Though he didn't entirely disagree. Asking William for help would come at a high price. We could gather the most powerful lairds. Show them the real threat posed by the MacTavish-MacAlpin alliance. If they see they could be next, they'll back us before the enemy grows. Evander considered it. He didn't like relying on alliances, but he wouldn't risk his people out of pride. He wouldn't be like his father.
Fine, he agreed at last with resignation.
Take the men you need. Convince them.
But don't beg.
I never would. But I can't go. It could take weeks and Isbel is due to give birth soon. Evander didn't fully understand Struan's urgency to be there. He wouldn't stay in the clan just to witness the birth of his child. That was the woman's task. His was to protect. Of course, for that to happen, Ealasaid had to conceive first. Evander allowed himself a fleeting fantasy, her in his bed, dark hair spread over the sheets, a satin nightdress slipping down her skin. Evander? Are you listening to me? Evander blinked, pushing the desire from his mind. I'll send more envoys. You go to the Frasers, Fletchers and McDougals. It shouldn't take more than 2 or 3 weeks. Isbel fainted this morning. The midwife says she's been dizzy for days, but Isbel asked her not to tell me. I forced her to stay in bed. If I leave, she won't listen. And if she faints again, I can't leave the clan. And I can't send just anyone. Their lairds would take it as an insult. Send the twins, Struan proposed. They did well on their last mission. Rugri, on a diplomatic mission? He has no patience. And Orlais will try to avoid conflict. Exactly. That makes them perfect. Let's send Sorley with them. He'll be the real envoy. The twins only need to nod. They represent your will. Evander considered it, for a moment. Fine. I'll tell Sorley. You handle the twins. Struan cursed under his breath. Sorley would agree without protest, but the twins. Rugri hated losing to him in duels, and Orlais would rather stay home than set off again. But Evander wasn't in the mood to entertain his brothers. He had another matter to deal with, Ealasaid. And this time, he would make it perfectly clear who was in charge. He was the laird. She would be his wife. And she would obey. However, when he arrived at the fortress, he couldn't go looking for her. 2 MacAlpin warriors had been captured during a skirmish on his land. Vengeance burned in his chest like living fire. He had waited years for this. He had already dealt with his father. He had held back his urges until the right moment. That patience had earned him the respect of his people. He was a true laird. But his vengeance wouldn't be complete until he saw Donal MacAlpin, bathed in his own blood. And that hour was finally drawing near. Chapter 13. To love is not to give up oneself, but to find what within has always been waiting to be seen. The laird marched with purpose toward the place where the prisoners were being held, intent on using them to send a clear message to Donal. He wanted him to know that he was aware of the alliance with the MacTavishers, and that he wouldn't allow him to get away with it. On the way he passed Hamish's cottage, and saw his wife clinging to their daughters, sobbing uncontrollably while Angus tried to comfort her. A flood of rage and hatred surged through him. His tense muscles demanded vengeance, merciless and without pause.
But just as fury began to cloud his thoughts, a woman's voice stopped him.
Ealasaid stood atop a hill, watching Marsaili ride her mare. With every word of encouragement she clapped as the girl gained confidence, urging the animal to pick up speed. The sound of the scene forced him to slow his horse. Ealasaid's mare neighed, as if inviting her to mount. Ealasaid smiled, and a spark of light lit up her face. Evander had never seen a smile so captivating. He stood there in silence, watching her. Ealasaid rode with a grace that seemed to blend perfectly with her horse. Her movements were fluid, as if they were one being, and the wind kissed her face, playing with loose strands of her hair. Evander felt jealous of the wind, wishing it were him brushing her skin. Marsaili said something, but Evander didn't catch it. Then Ealasaid's laughter, light and melodious, broke through the air, and each echo sank into his chest like sparks of light, dissolving the shadows that clung to him. Slowly the rage within him began to fade, his body relaxing. He shook his head, letting out a breath. He urged his stallion forward, though the animal, momentarily distracted, took a few seconds to obey, captivated by the scene just as he was. He forced himself to continue with his duty, and head toward the prisoners, knowing that above all, nothing mattered more than fulfilling his role. But deep down no one would ever know that their lives had been spared for one simple reason. Ealasaid, with her light, had given him back his calm, and his sanity.